Hi, my name's Andrew Dudley and this is Earth Live, a webcast featuring interviews with people working on the front lines of conservation. Today we're joined with Michael O'Brien Onyeka from Nairobi. How are you, Michael?
Hi, Andrew. I'm very good. Thanks for having me on your program.
It's a pleasure. How is Nairobi?
It's okay as it can be in the new normal, but the resilience of people in this part of the world is quite strong. So yeah, we're coping and things go on as normal as possible.
That's great news. So we wanted to talk to you today, please, about the impact the coronavirus is having on the protected areas and the community protected areas. So could you give us a little bit of an update as to how things are going?
So, as you might know, in Africa, including Kenya, where I'm based, a lot of the protected areas are not only in government hands, but a majority of them are in community hands. So when we talk about protected areas in Africa, we must always include not just the government gazetted protected areas, but equally gazetted community conservancies. And of course, this COVID environment has really impacted negatively on these conservancies, particularly the community-led ones.
And can I ask you what percentage of protected areas in Africa are community owned?
Close to 60, 65 in some places, up to 70% of all protected areas are in community hands. So it's quite a big chunk of all the protected areas across Africa. And it's important to know that these community conservancies are neither funded nor supported by the relevant federal government. So they fund themselves and they rely on tourism revenue to keep themselves going.
Okay. And what could you give us an idea of the kind of revenue that a community would make from tourism?
Thank you. That's a very good question. It would depend on the location, of course, and the advanced system such community conservancies have put in place. Some may make maybe $50,000 a year, some 100. But one community conservancy that Conservation International, my organization, works with in northern Kenya called the Namunyak Community Conservancy, in 2019 they made $300,000 from tourism alone.
So that seems like a lot of money for being able to put into protecting the park and for building schools. Maybe is that the situation?
It is, and that's part of the reason my organization supports such conservancies, because in the absence of federal or state support system, they have to look after themselves. This money revenue they derive from tourism goes into setting up health facilities, education facilities for their children, and of course putting food on the table through various revenue sharing formulas that we support them to set up in the community. So it's very critical source of revenue.
And how does it work with there's a lot of pastoral farmers working in the area or operating in the area. So do they come together and join these communities, or do they coexist? Could you give us a sense of how that works?
The way it usually works on the ground is that in every community, like anywhere in the world, you have different households. So these households come together and form a group ranch. The Namuya Community Conservancy, there are 4 groups or group ranches within that, and they work together under the Namuya Conservation umbrella. And we support the conservation umbrella, and then when the revenues come, the governing mechanism ensures that all the group ranches get their equal share and that it trickles down to individual families. So it's a very good system set up there, and we monitor and support in making sure that things go as planned. Of course, there will be outlining communities that are outside that agreement, and that's where you work to minimize any friction and conflict. So if you have a landscape that is doing well because it happens to be lucky to have international NGO support like mine, and the outlying community, it's not covered because we can't do everything considering the limited resources we usually have. So we try to see how they can coexist. So in such places, you usually have problem of drought, and they are pastoral communities. So the communities we work with sometimes allows neighboring communities to bring in their herds of cattle to graze within their pristine environment. We call it organized grazing, just to keep the peace as we continue to look for means to expand the scheme to the neighboring communities. Yeah.
And so this, you talk about kind of encouraging the peace. So you're looking at preserving the peace, the wildlife, and the ecosystem. Is that correct?
Oh, definitely. The connection between conservation, thriving livelihood system, and peace and security is very interconnected, and you can't do one without the other. A good example, again, is northern Kenya. So you have pastoral communities in the whole of northern Kenya, southern Somalia, southern Ethiopia, northern Uganda. They inhabit similar ecosystem that suffers from drought and impacts of climate change. And they are nomadic in nature. They roam around. They don't respect international borders. They roam around with their cattle. So if they run out of grass and water in northern Uganda or southern Ethiopia, the next thing they will do is and if the grass is greener on the Kenyan side, you will find people coming over because they are desperate to get their cattle fed. If not, they will lose their entire livelihood. The same thing within Kenya. You have different communities, ethnic groups with different cattle herds, and they barge into each other, fighting over these increasingly scarce natural resources. So when you get a landscape thriving, if you're able to restore the degraded rangeland, make the rivers to flow again, make the grass greener, then the communities wouldn't need to travel 5 kilometers with their cattle and risk going into conflict with neighboring communities. They can actually graze their cattle within their community domain. So it not only supports conservation, it not only supports more resilient livelihood systems, putting food on the table for people, but it also creates wider peace and security in the region. So it's that's the way we approach it. A full spectrum approach. We look at all these nexus or links and try to address each and every one of them as much as possible.
So it sounds when it's successful, it's a win-win for everybody involved.
It is a definite win-win. And you can even, if you bring, most of these groups are in the informal sector. And one of the things we are discussing with governments in different African countries is that the more you make these groups more resilient, the more and you can address the market so they are not shortchanged by the middlemen, and they double or triple their revenue from their cattle herding, like we've seen in some places in South Africa where we've run similar systems, then they are willing to pay a fraction of that as tax. That's increased revenue to the taxman, to the government. So it's in everybody's enlightened self-interest to invest in conservation that brings real tangible benefits to people on the ground.
So what's been the impact then from coronavirus? What have you seen happen this year?
Well, it's been total devastation. Because like I said earlier, most of these community conservancies across Africa are self-sustaining and they rely on tourism revenue. So one of the things that coronavirus brought about was the global restrictions on travel, which meant both local and international tourists could not move around, which meant also that these conservancies had zero tourists. And so the conservancy I was talking to you earlier that reported nearly $300,000 last year, when we checked in with them in March this year, they said their projection was zero revenue in 2020. We are hoping desperately that that would change for the better because of the slight opening of borders now that we are seeing. But best case scenario is that they might achieve 30% of their normal annual revenue. That's the best case assessment, but which is still hard considering hard on the communities and everyone, considering, like I said earlier, that they rely on this revenue to put food on the table, to maintain their health facilities and educational facilities. And also, of course, to support the anti-poaching law enforcement systems that are set up to protect these conservancies.
And so one of the challenges has been then, because there's no safety net from the local government, that these communities are now having to turn to hunting the animals to put food on the table, the herbivores, that is.
Yes, you are very right, Andrew. Since we've been monitoring the impact of coronavirus on communities since January, and then, of course, through like quarterly assessment. And you could see by March, April, it was really beginning to hit hard on these communities. Like you rightly said, especially in the absence of any social safety net, most African countries do not have social security. People have lost their jobs in the cities because of COVID shutdown, and most of them move back to the villages in the rural areas to get a bit of community support system going to support them. And in such a situation where you've lost your livelihood system, you've lost your job and income, and your kids are starving, we are seeing and have seen increase artisanal harvesting of wildlife purely for food, as a primary source of protein for most of these communities. And I say artisanal harvesting to distinguish it from the commercial kind of poaching that are usually led by organized criminal gangs and are done purely for profit, kill a wildlife or capture it and sell it and make money. No, what we are seeing increasingly in these communities, in and around these communities, is the artisanal harvesting of wildlife for food. And I think it's due to desperation.
Yeah, I mean, unless it's very long term, there's the only risk is that if the herbivores get hunted down, and it's going to impact the carnivores long term.
Yes, Andrew, it's an intricate, nature is an intricate balance, a circle of life. So if you hunt the herbivores to extinction or vastly degrade the number of herbivores, then it impacts the carnivores like the lions, the hyenas, the leopards, the cheetahs, and so on that hunt these herbivores, and then they will go into, they will get into trouble because they can't find their normal place in the food chain. So it is wise, it's understandable why people do this. As a conservationist, it worries us, and we are working with communities and governments across the continent to find a range of solutions, including immediate solutions, which basically what we are pushing is not for wholesale deployment of security forces to start arresting community members who out of desperation are hunting wildlife. No, but to look for short-term cushion mechanisms like cash transfers, food parcels, and then from there work towards medium to long-term solution, including diversifying the livelihood options that are available for such communities, and that's diversifying the revenue streams away from solely tourism linked. So a lot of work to be done, but we are engaging in these kind of discussions at the moment.
Excellent. And from a GDP perspective, how much does the tourism industry account for in Kenya? And what is the response to the government for offering this kind of support?
Oh, there is a strong incentive for the government, because I think I might be wrong, but something close to 20% of the Kenyan GDP comes from tourism. So it's not an insignificant percentage or contributor to the GDP. And therefore, to invest a fraction of that benefit that comes to the state, to invest a fraction of that to ensure that this tourism will keep on giving, because basically at the end of the day, it is nature that is giving. Nobody creates nature. Nature is there. We come and meet it. All we need to do is to steward it properly and don't degrade it. And all we are asking stakeholders, including governments, private sectors, philanthropies, is to support these communities by investing upfront a small fraction of investment that can go a very long way to get us those multiple wins you were talking earlier. A win for the environment, a win for livelihood and the eradication of poverty, and a win for peace and security in the region.
And what has been the response from the kind of criminal networks? Are they stepping into the park now, trying to poach animals illegally?
Unfortunately, going side by side with the economic downturn, we've seen an increase in commercial poaching across the continent, including in Kenya. We are seeing poaching happening in places where we haven't recorded any single poaching for nearly 4 years. So that says a lot. So, and what we think is happening is that with the massive drop in employment because of COVID restrictions and the packing up of a lot of businesses and people losing their livelihood. So people become more susceptible to bribery and corruption because they are desperate. Also, when poachers move across these communities, like we've said earlier, that have lost their main source, their main or only source of revenue, then these organized criminal gangs who are behind the poaching becomes effectively the only employers in the area. They are the only ones that can offer you $50 cash to point out where the last elephant you saw was, or the last rhino. And people out of desperation may be tempted to take those $30, $50, $100, whatever it may be, just to ensure that they have food for a couple of days. So the environment, unfortunately, suits organized criminal gangs. They thrive in this kind of environment, and they have clearly been utilizing this gap and loopholes. And maybe that's why we are seeing increased incidences of poaching. And not just poaching, it's also deforestation, which means cutting of trees, large-scale deforestation of trees, primarily to make charcoal, which are either used by communities as a primary source of cooking energy or sold in the market, sometimes in the black market for good returns. So there is deforestation and there is poaching going on.
What is it that an international viewer could do to help, and what kind of support can they give?
There's a lot people can do, starting from where you live. If you are in the UK, you are in the US, in any society you are that has interest in Africa, and I would like to believe like the global north has some interest in Africa, is to approach your congressman or woman, your local MP in the case of the UK and so on, and encourage them that as governments think of both local and international anti-COVID or COVID relief packages, because there's those being discussed right now as we talk, that say, for example, United States Agency for International Development should include support for community conservancies in Africa in their packages that they are thinking of supporting African countries with. The same across Europe, in Germany or France or UK. At the individual level also, you could go online. Thank God we live in a internet of everything age. You could go online and search for community conservancies in different parts of Africa. Like in Kenya, you can search for the Namunya Conservancy or the Masai Mara Conservancies. And most of these conservancies have their own website, and you can donate directly to them. Or, also people can fund organizations like mine, Conservation International, that are working on the ground, like I've explained, with these communities directly, knowing that whatever you give will go directly straight to these communities. So there are many ways people can support, share the ideas with your friends, give some ideas. We don't know everything, so there might be other great ideas on how to cushion the impact of COVID on these communities and what to do as a medium to long-term options. So all ideas welcome. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. And are there any final remarks that you'd like to make?
To say that people need nature in order to thrive. And there is nowhere else that is so true than in Africa, including in Kenya. But if COVID-19 has shown us something, which everybody, I'm using COVID because everyone can relate to it. If COVID-19 has shown us something, it is that there is a direct link between our well-being and the well-being of nature. COVID-19 is not a natural disease, it's not a natural disaster, it's a man-made disaster. Man-made in the sense that it is a zoonotic disease, which means it would have remained in the forests with the animals. Nobody has seen any wildlife suffering from COVID. They know they have billion years of research and development to cope with this. So the forests, especially tropical forests, remain the natural quarantine environment for zoonotic diseases. But when we deforest, when we degrade the forest and destroy the forest, therefore limiting or reducing or removing the natural quarantine environment for animals, we create problems for ourselves. Then in addition, we kill or capture this wildlife, take them out of their natural environment to wet markets, whether in Wuhan or anywhere, in close proximity to humans, and then it expands into the human environment. Things like SARS, things like so many zoonotic diseases that we have suffered are all man-made. And therefore, there is no better time than now for us all to double down on the commitment to protect nature, because actually protecting nature is protecting ourselves. The other thing, if I may, is to say, if there is any good thing, I'm being cynical here, but if there is any good thing from COVID, it is that it has shown itself to be an equalizer. Equalizer in the sense that previously people thought if I'm a multi-billionaire, multi-millionaire, I'm a high class, middle class, this kind of discussions doesn't bother me, it doesn't relate to me. But what COVID has shown, one of the things COVID has shown is that whether you are the busker or grifter in the street or in the subway of New York singing and begging for money, or the multi-billionaire with their private jet, you can't go anywhere. COVID affected and continues to affect everybody. It's a non-discriminator, which shows us that it is in our collective enlightened self-interest to think how to continue to secure nature so as to avoid future pandemics, especially zoonotic pandemics like the one we are witnessing. So people need nature to thrive. All we need to do is be better stewards of nature. And that's what we are appealing to everyone, to pay more attention, support nature conservation in our own self-interest. Thanks.
Michael, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating interview and with plenty of insights. And may we thank you for AF Live and also on behalf of our viewers for the incredible work that you're doing on the ground in Kenya. And we wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you. I think you are doing an amazing work. We all need to work together, and I hope your viewers will reach out on the back of this and see how they can support. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Take care, Michael.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Hi, my name's Kirsty. If you enjoyed the content today and would like to watch more videos like this, please subscribe to our social media channels or join us at www.f.live/join.